Geronimo Stilton. A very Merry Christmas. Christmas time is always special. It was winter in New Mouse City, the capital of Mouse Island, and the weather outside was frightful. Sitting at my desk one chilly evening, I gazed out my window at the snowflakes falling softly over the city. Oh, I almost forgot to introduce myself. My name is Stilton, Geronimo Stilton. I am the publisher of the Rodent's Gazette, the most famous newspaper here on Mouse Island. I shivered and put my paws up on the space heater I kept under my desk. Sometimes it felt as if winter would go on forever. Brr, I hate cold weather. But then I remembered something that cheered me up. Christmas was just a few days away. Ah, Christmas. It was my favorite holiday. Just thinking about Christmas reminded me of all the things I had to do. Holy cheese, my list was almost as long as Santa's. I still had to decorate my mouse hole, buy last minute gifts, and figure out the holiday menu. There were so many delicious treats to eat at Christmas time. Candy canes, roasted chestnuts, toasted cheese logs. Visions of cheese puffs. As I sat there daydreaming about the magic of Christmas, the door burst open and my grandfather, William Shortpaws, stomped in. He shoved his snout within an inch of mine and shouted, "Wake up! Are there visions of cheese puffs dancing in your head, grandson? Wake up!" I almost jumped out of my fur. "No, of course not." "Well, what do you mean by visions of cheese puffs?" "I was thinking about the menu for Christmas dinner, and cheese puffs would certainly be delicious." "I know it's almost Christmas, but that's no excuse for daydreaming," Grandfather thundered. "Geronimo, I want you to focus on business, on the newspaper. It doesn't run itself, you know. This paper needs a leader with new ideas, not one who naps on the job." Pointed to a plaque that hung from the wall. It said, "The White House wastes neither time nor cheese." Then he tapped his paw on my snout a couple of times. "Knock, knock. Anybody home?" He picked up the phone and called Miss Raven, one of the assistants on staff. He boomed, "Miss Raven, please send a memo to everybody at the Rodent's Gazette. The wise mouse wastes neither time nor cheese. Sign it, William Shortpaws." I sighed. "Don't get your tail in a twist, Grandfather. Even if you don't sign it, everyone will know the memo comes from you." It was true. No one else would be so obnoxious. Well, if I didn't pop in from time to time to see how things are going, this paper would be about as successful as moldy cheese at an early rat special. Grandfather sniffed. Suddenly, he brightened up. "Oh, I almost forgot what I came here to tell you. I had a great idea." Oh, that made me a little worried. You see, my grandfather really was a brilliant mouse, but his great ideas always seemed to get me into trouble. "You had a great idea?" I repeated nervously. "Yes," he exclaimed. "This year the entire Stilton family will spend Christmas." He paused and gave me a sly look. I knew he was just trying to make the moment more dramatic, but the anticipation was driving me crazy. "Where, Grandfather?" "In New York." "New York? Why New York?" I asked. Grandfather smiled. "Because my best friend, Londic MacMouse lives in New York. I met him a long time ago when traveling around the world for the Rodent's Gazette. Which reminds me, grandson, you should be out there sniffing out new stories instead of in here warming your tail in that cushy chair. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but before I could squeak a word, grandfather cut me off. Well, anyway, Londic invited us to spend Christmas with his family. He lives in a fantastic apartment overlooking Central Park. And see, he sent this letter. Dear Willie, how are you? I was thinking about all the fabulous times we used to have when you were the editor of the Rodent's Gazette. Every so often you'd pop up in New York looking for a scoop to jazz up your newspaper. We used to go out and see all the sights. To be young in New York. I got to thinking we may be getting older and our whiskers may be falling out, but we can still have a good time. So, I'd like to invite you and your entire family to spend Christmas at my home here in New York City. I hope you'll accept the invitation of a dear old friend. Yours truly, Nordic McMouse. He waved a letter and a photo under my snout. But, grandfather, we always celebrate Christmas at my mouse hole in New Mouse City. I protested. It's tradition. We have been doing it for years. Grandfather snorted. Geronimo, traditions are made to be broken. Besides, you always say that it's exciting to discover different customs and cultures and to have new experiences. I twitched my tail anxiously. He had a good point there. You're right, grandfather, I said. But maybe we should have Christmas at my place and then we can travel. Grandfather William cut me off. Nothing doing, Geronimo. It's all arranged. The rest of the family has already agreed to go to New York. My whiskers drooped. Really? I couldn't believe no one had told me. I was always the last to know the big family news. Well, of course, if everyone else wants to go, then there's nothing to squeak about. Suddenly, the door burst open and the entire family raced into my office. Uncle Geronimo, did you hear? My nephew Benjamin squealed. We are spending Christmas in New York. We are all leaving tomorrow. I smiled down at my favorite nephew and tried to sound enthusiastic. Yes, yes, grandfather just told me. We'll spend Christmas in New York. It will be great. Everybody was excited. They were all squeaking at once, happily making plans for the trip. As for myself, I started for home. That night, I went to bed early. I was depressed. You see, I was worried that I hadn't organized fun Christmases at my mouse hole. That had to be the reason everyone was so excited to spend Christmas in New York. Maybe my cooking wasn't tasty enough for the family gourmets. Maybe my decorations weren't creative enough for the family artists. Maybe my gifts weren't fun enough for the family mouselings. Yes, it was all my fault. Everyone wanted to go to New York for Christmas instead of spending it at our beloved home in New Mouse City. I had been a terrible host, and I had no one but myself to blame. I lay awake for a very long time, feeling miserable. Finally, I curled up into a fur ball and fell asleep. A trip to the Big Apple. The next day, the entire Stilton family left for New York. Everyone except me, that is. I stayed behind until 2 days before Christmas. I had so much work to do at the newspaper that I just couldn't tear myself away before then. On my last afternoon in the office, I wished my co-workers a Merry Christmas. Then I hurried home to prepare for the trip. I put my best suit in my yellow suitcase. Then I packed all the gifts my grandfather had bought for the MacMouse family. Grandson, I want to make a nice impression on the MacMouses. He shouted at me. So don't forget anything. I didn't. I was too scared of him to leave anything behind. Last but not least, I attached a bright blue tag with my name and address to the suitcase handle. That would make it easier for me to find it when I arrived in New York. I scurried to the airport and turned in my bag at the check-in counter. The agent took it with a smile. You can pick up your luggage in New York, Mr. Stilton. No need to worry. I thanked him and headed to the gate where my plane was waiting. Half an hour later, I boarded the plane and my trip was underway. I settled into my seat and pulled out a tourist guide to New York. Then I got out a map of the city and looked for the MacMouse's house. A yellow bag with a bright blue tag. After a long, bumpy flight, we finally landed at New York's Kennedy Airport. And not a moment too soon as far as I was concerned. My paws were so cramped and stiff, I felt like I'd been stuffed inside a tin of miniature cheese snacks. It was morning. The airport was already crowded and incredibly busy. There were tons of rodents scurrying about all over the place. Some had just arrived and others were about to depart. Everyone was in a hurry to get somewhere. After waiting in the long line to get to the immigration counter to have my passport stamped, I headed for the baggage claim area to retrieve my suitcase from Mouse Air, the official airline of Mouse Island. I couldn't wait to get my bag. I was already looking forward to a nice warm bath and something cheesy to munch on at the MacMouse's apartment. I was so tired from the long flight, I felt like I was going to fall asleep on my paws. I kept yawning. Then I saw a yellow bag with a bright blue tag on the baggage carousel and I got a second wind. I grabbed it and headed for the exit. This isn't my bag. Outside the airport, it was snowing. I hailed a taxi. Then I loaded my suitcase into the trunk and gave the driver the MacMouse's address in Manhattan. Halfway into the city, I realized I didn't have my wallet on me. Holy cheese, I only had my passport and the New York City tourist guide in my pocket. I must have left my wallet in my suitcase. I asked the cab driver to pull over. He popped the trunk and I took out the yellow bag. When I opened it, I had a big surprise. Crusty kitty litter, this wasn't my bag. Where were all my clothes? The Christmas gifts for the MacMouses were missing. Oh my God, if I didn't find those gifts, I'd be cheese toast. Grandfather William would make sure of it. Oh no, this isn't my bag, I cried. The cab driver shrugged. That's your problem, not mine. I just want my money. But I don't have a penny on me. My wallet is in my bag, I shrieked. Since I didn't have any money, the cabbie demanded my beloved gold fountain pen as payment. I didn't dare complain. He was so huge he looked like a sumo rat with massive muscles that looked even bigger when he was mad. He snatched the pen from my paw and climbed back in the cab, slamming the door behind him. The cab zoomed away, leaving skid marks behind it. It wasn't until it had disappeared from sight that I realized I was stranded on the highway. I stood on the side of the road in the snow. I was halfway between the airport and Manhattan. I was miles from home. I was exhausted. I had no money. I had a humongous bag to lug around. And it wasn't even mine.